Hi, this is Jason Salami. I'm an associate professor of epidemiology at the University of South Florida College of Public Health, and this seems to be my 15th video on case positivity. Specifically today, you're going to learn two things, hopefully. One is a little bit more detail on what the difference is between the two main positivity measures that are reported by the Florida Department of Health. And the second thing that you'll learn is I'm being very lazy on this video. I could probably do a much better job if I had some really nice graphics and a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm a little exhausted at this point in time, and so I've done everything through Excel, so hopefully the central messages still come through. So again, as a precursor to this is a snapshot of today's statewide report from the Florida Department of Health related to COVID-19. And again, the two main positivity measures that you will see Florida report. On the top here, you see the number and percent of Florida residents with positive test results. So again, just looking at August 14th, you can see that basically this is a person level analysis where we take the total number of people who tested positive today, regardless of whether or not they tested positive or negative previously. It's just a snapshot of what happened today, regardless of what happened on previous days. And again, that number is the number of people who tested positive on a given day divided by the total number of people tested on that day. And so in this case, today's number was 10.97. And then we've got an alternative measure called the percent positivity for new cases. And again, the major difference between the two, because in all honesty, the measure is calculated very similarly. It's still the number of people who tested positive divided by the total number of people tested. The big difference is that we exclude anybody who has tested positive on a previous day. We don't do that to negative test results, but we do exclude anybody who's tested positive on a previous day, and that's why it's called the percent positivity for new cases. Right? And again, you'll notice that there is a difference between these numbers. In this particular day, it was just over 3%, and it's gotten as wide as 4% in the past 2 weeks. So again, hopefully we can drill down and find out what is the impact of repeat testing on the difference between these two measures. So the first thing I want to do is introduce you to the different kind of numbers I'm going to present to you, and then I'm ultimately going to give you 5 different scenarios that demonstrate how repeat tests and how the distribution of those repeat tests among repeat negatives and repeat positives all factor into how different those measures are. So again, we're going to start very simple. For all of these scenarios, we're going to assume that up to yesterday, these were our numbers. So again, this is a person level assessment. We had 500,000 people who we classify as positive, which means no matter how many tests they've gotten, at least one of those tests was positive. So again, that's 500,000 people. And then 4,500,000 people who were classifying as negative. And again, those could be people who were only tested one time as negative, or it could be a person who's tested on 100 different days as negative. But the key is, for all of the times that they've been tested, they've only tested negative. So that's 5 million total people as of yesterday. Okay, and then we're going to add in some new information, right? What happened today? So in this case, I've added some cells that are referring to people who have never been tested before. So these are true new tests, and in this case, those numbers are going to be 40,000 people tested positive and 160,000 people tested negative today, or 200,000 total new people tested. I'm then going to factor in a couple of different things about repeat tests. So again, what this is going to mean, and you can see the arrows here, right? I might have a person who yesterday I classified as positive. They might get tested again today. They might test positive again. So that's this top one, positive, positive. They're already classified as positive, and they've tested positive today. I could also have somebody who's now getting over the virus. They're no longer shedding virus, and so they could have been previously classified as positive, but today they tested negative. Then you could have the other scenarios, right? Somebody who I previously classified as negative, they've never tested positive before, but today they test positive. So that's why I'm calling them a negative positive. And finally, a person who's only tested negative in the past, and today they also test negative. So that's a negative, negative. So those are the 4 possible combinations of repeat tests. Then I'm going to build in what is the impact of repeat tests. This will certainly make more sense as we go through the scenarios, but the 3 main factors I'm going to look at are what percentage of all people tested today were a repeat test. The other 2 things I'm very interested in is what is the percentage of repeat positive tests excluded? So basically it's going to be anybody who is a repeat test who tested positive today. So that's this cell and this cell, right? What proportion of those had already tested positive? Because those are going to be people that we are excluding from the percent positivity for new cases. And then the other one is, what is the percentage of repeat negative tests that are going to be excluded? So again, that's this one, right? Somebody who was previously positive but tested negative today, and somebody who was previously negative who tested negative today. I want to know what proportion previously tested positive, because again, this is going to be somebody that I'm going to exclude from that percent positivity for new cases. So hopefully that makes sense. The last thing I'm going to factor in is the 2 measures that we're most interested in, the 2 measures that are reported by the Florida Department of Health. That is what I'm calling the case positivity, and then that percent positivity for new cases. And last but not least, I'm going to also factor in something else that some people have been calculating, which is not really a percentage, it's a ratio. It's the ratio of new cases to new people tested. So let's break all of these down. First of all, the simplest one I think is the case positivity. All that this is going to ultimately look at is, again, ignoring repeat testing. I just want to know today how many people tested positive. That's going to be the numerator. The denominator is going to be the total number of people tested. Okay, so in this case, in this first scenario in which I have no repeat tests, this is certainly not something that's going to ever happen on a day in Florida, but this is our scenario 1. So all 200,000 people that were tested today had never been tested before. They're all new tests. And so again, I would take the total number of those who tested positive divided by the total number tested, and I would come up with 20% case positivity for today. What would I do with the percent positive for new cases? So again, the numerator in that is brand new people who have tested positive, who've never been tested before. In this scenario, that is all 40,000 people, because I mentioned that these are brand new people who have never been tested. So the numerator is the same. In this case, the denominator is also the same, because if you remember, this is total people tested minus people who had tested positive on a previous day. But again, I just told you all of these are new tests, so none of them tested positive on a previous day. So this goes to show you that if I have no repeat tests whatsoever, the case positivity and the percent positivity for new cases will be identical. So there will be no difference. The last measure is that ratio of new cases to new people tested. So again, the numerator is going to be the number of people who tested positive today who have never tested positive before. Again, that's 40,000 in this case. And the denominator is going to be new people tested today. So they've never been tested before. Again, in a scenario like this one in which we have no repeat tests, all 3 measures are going to have the exact same value. Okay, so let's look at a new scenario. So this new scenario I've added down here as a next set of rows. And so in this case, I just want to draw your attention to now we're going to have some repeat tests. But the big thing is, I'm going to point to this and I'm going to show you how it's calculated in just a second. It's a small number of repeat tests. Only about 5.5% of all tests on this day, which again, there's still going to be 200,000 total people tested, right? Only about 5.5% of those will be a repeat test. So let's go through this in a little bit more detail. Again, the scenario for yesterday, those 5 million people, that's the exact same. This time, instead of 40,000 new positive tests, I've got 39,000 new positive tests. I'm still going to have a total of 40,000, but I've only got 39,000 positive tests among people who have never been tested before. And the same thing with the negative tests. I'm not going to have the full 160. I'm going to have 150,000 people who tested negative today who have never been tested on a previous day. So that's 189,000 brand new people tested today who have never been tested before. So obviously now I've got some repeat tests, and this is what it looks like. So I've got 500 people tested today who tested positive who had previously tested positive. I've got 500 people who tested negative today who had previously tested positive. I've got 500 people who tested positive today who had previously tested negative, so that's also a new positive. And then I've got 9,500 people who tested negative today, and they had also tested negative on at least one previous day. So 11,000 repeat tests, and this is how they were distributed. So again, our key metrics now are the percent of repeat tests was 5.5%, relatively low. The percent of repeat positives excluded was 50%. So again, if you look at how this is calculated, I'm basically taking this number, right? The positive, that's the number that would be excluded because they had tested positive on a previous day, divided by the total number of repeat tests that tested positive. So that's 500 and 500, which is 1,000. So again, 500 out of 1,000 positive tests today that were repeats would ultimately be excluded because they previously tested positive. I know that's a mouthful, but these measures will be very important in looking at the difference between the two measures. And then the percentage of repeat negatives that would be excluded is only 5%. And so again, here are my negative tests among repeats, those two right here, 500 and 9,500. And the only ones that I would end up excluding are those that had tested positive on a previous day. So a very small proportion of the repeat negative tests that I would be excluding. So let's look at how our measures line up. Case positivity is the exact same because repeat measures don't mean anything to case positivity. It's just boiling it down to, of all people tested today, what proportion tested positive. The percent positivity for new cases, of course, does exclude people who tested positive on a previous day. But what I want you to pay attention to is look at the difference from the case positivity. It's barely any difference at all. Why? Well, the big why is because we have a small proportion of all people tested today that were repeat tests. So this is a good take-home message, that when my proportion of all tests on a given day that are repeat tests is very small, you will not have a big difference between these two measures. And I would say it's the same thing for that alternate, that third measure, the percent positive, I still have for new cases. This is really that ratio of new cases to new people tested. So I'll apologize, I didn't update this label up here. So this is the ratio of new cases to new people tested. And so again, because the proportion of all tests that are repeat tests is very small, the majority of people in my denominator and my numerator are brand new people tested, right? So again, not a big difference between these three. What about scenario 3? So let's start to up the percentage of all tests that are repeat tests. So in this scenario, what I've done is I've made a high proportion. So you'll notice here, there's still 200,000 people that were tested. 100,000 had never been tested before. 100,000 had. So the proportion of all tests that are repeat tests are 50%, right? But the other thing I want you to pay attention to, so really the numbers here aren't that important. What is important is the percent of repeat positives. So again, that's this one and this one that are excluded is the same as the proportion of repeat negatives, this one and this one, that are excluded. So again, I'm excluding 15% of all positive repeat tests today because they had tested positive previously. And that's the same percentage, 15% of all negative tests that are repeats today that I'm going to exclude because they had tested positive. So I just want to quickly show you exactly what those percentages are now in the case positivity and the percent positivity for new cases. They are identical. So this is so take-home message number 1 was when the percentage of all tests on a given day that are repeats is small, you have a small difference between these two measures. Your take-home message number 2 is when the proportion of repeat positive and negative tests that are excluded because they had tested positive on a previous day, when those two proportions are identical, the two measures will be identical. So again, that's a big take home. So the two factors that are ultimately going to drive the differences between these two is going to be how frequent are the repeat tests. The other one is the differential treatment of repeat positive and negative tests. So again, when that distribution is the same, the measures will be identical. Now notice that is not the case for this third measure, the ratio of new cases to the new people tested. That is obviously being influenced heavily by the proportion of all tests that are repeat tests. And again, why is that? Because the denominator is only new people tested. So instead of 200,000 people who are tested today, only 100,000 of them are new tests, people who had never been tested before. So again, obviously that's going to change dramatically what the N percentage is. Scenario number 4. So all I've done here is, so I still have that high level of repeat testing. Still 50% of all people tested today are repeat tests. But now what I've done is I've made these two percentages, how I'm handling the repeat positives and the repeat negatives, I'm going to make those two very different from one another. So in this case, 50% of the positive repeat tests, so again, remember who the positive repeat tests are. They're going to be positive today, and they had previously been positive, as well as positive today, who had previously been classified as negative. 50% of those had already been positive. So I'm going to throw away 50% of all repeat positive tests, but I'm only going to throw away 6.3% of repeat negative tests. Why? Because again, of these repeat negative tests, only a small proportion were previously positive, and that's who I'm excluding. So again, big difference in these two. Now you start to see the differences between the case positivity and the percent positivity for new cases, right? In this case, it's 20% versus 16% because I have a lot of repeat tests and I'm treating the repeat positives very different from the repeat negatives. That proportion that I'm throwing out is quite different. And again, in this case, just notice that again, because I have a high proportion of repeat tests, my denominator is only new people tested. So I'm going to have this ratio of new cases to new people tested be very different from those other two measures. And last but not least, this final scenario, which is going to blow your minds because of what we've tended to see in the actual data. Again, 50% repeat tests, but I'm just going to flip-flop these two, right? In this case, I'm going to throw out way more repeat negative tests than I'm going to throw out repeat positive tests. And so I'm just going to show you what the numbers look like. Look at this. We're very used to seeing the percent positivity for new cases below the case positivity. But that's not a hard and fast rule. If the numbers played out like this, which is possible, you would have the percent positivity for new cases be higher. So this is your take-home number 3. The percent positivity for new cases does not always have to be higher when it is different from the case positivity. Lower. It could be higher, right? So again, we're used to seeing something like this, where the percent positivity for new cases is lower than the case positivity, but it does not have to be that way. In this case, because I'm throwing out way more repeat negatives who had tested positive on a previous day than I am repeat positives who tested positive on a previous day, that proportion would be, or that percentage would be a lot higher. And again, still big difference for that ratio of new cases to new people tested because that's primarily driven by the percentage of tests that are repeat tests. So what's my take home in all of this? So I recopied the scenario that is most common in Florida. That was scenario number 4, where I have a tendency to see the case positivity higher than the percent positivity for new cases. Why? Remember, scenario number 4 had a lot of repeat tests, and we had a tendency to throw out a higher proportion of repeat positives than throwing out repeat negatives. So why is this panning out more often than not? Because again, when we see over here, right, we see over here that we've got a lot more, a lot higher percentage for the case positivity than the percent positivity for new cases. This is actual data from Florida for the past month. you see we have over 50% who are repeat tests, and we have a tendency to throw out way more repeat positives than we do repeat negatives. So it's just that's the way that the data are playing out, which is why we tend to see the percent positivity for new cases lower than the case positivity rate. I hope this helps. You can go back, rewind. I know it's really dense information, but that's all I got today.